The scariest part isn't the moment someone disappears. It's the moment right before it, when everything still looks normal. A teenager steps out of a beachfront hotel on a warm spring night in Myrtle Beach. She's alone but not panicked. She's done something like this before: a quick walk, a short visit, a promise to be right back. Her phone is in her hand. There are lights, traffic, other people somewhere nearby. The town is loud in that familiar vacation way. Music drifting, doors opening and closing, laughter down the street. And then her texts stop. No dramatic final call. No screaming heard by strangers. Just silence where there should have been one more message. I'm back. For 13 years, that silence swallowed every answer. This is the story of Brittanee Drexel, of a secret spring break trip that wasn't supposed to happen, her last known movements on the Myrtle Beach Strip, the searches that kept starting and stopping, and the long, complicated path to the truth. And as we go, we're going to talk about something bigger than one case. Why young travelers, especially teens far from home, can be so vulnerable in the exact places that are supposed to feel carefree. Brittanee Drexel was 17 years old in the spring of 2009, from chilly, New York, outside Rochester. The kind of town where people still say be safe like they mean, I'll see you later. Brittanee was a teenager in that in-between stage, old enough to feel independent, young enough that the world still had guardrails around her. Spring break was coming up, and like so many teens, Brittanee wanted what spring break represents: freedom, sun, photos, stories to bring back. Myrtle Beach, South Carolina, is one of those places that shows up in your head before you ever go. The ocean, the neon, the boardwalk, crowds of young people who all look like they're having the best week of their lives. But there was one problem. Her mom said no. Not because she didn't trust Brittanee, but because she didn't trust the situation. The trip Brittanee wanted wasn't a family vacation. It was a teen trip. No parents. No adults. A bunch of young people driving hours away to a party town. And in the way that only happens in families, the word no didn't end the conversation. It lit it on fire. Arguments. Hurt feelings. That teenage certainty that parents just don't get it. Then Brittanee made a decision that would shape everything that came next. She told her mom she was going to stay with a friend for a couple days. And instead, she left the state. She went to Myrtle Beach anyway. That's the first uncomfortable truth in this case. The trip was secret. Not from everyone. Her boyfriend knew where she was, but from the person who would have moved heaven and earth to protect her before she ever stepped out that door. And what happens next is why that matters. Because when something goes wrong far from home, time is everything. And secrecy steals time. Brittanee arrived in Myrtle Beach with friends and checked into a hotel. One of the beachfront places where the rooms are packed close together and spring break energy leaks through every wall. People come and go. Somebody's always walking somewhere. The lobby sees hundreds of faces. In a crowd like that, you can be surrounded and still be alone. Over the next couple days, Brittanee was texting and checking in with her boyfriend back in New York. The messages painted a picture that didn't match the sunny vacation vibe. She wasn't having the best week of her life. There were tensions. She didn't feel fully included. She wanted to go home. And if you've ever been the odd one out on a trip, especially at that age, you know how that feeling shrinks your world. Suddenly your safety net isn't the friends you came with. It's your phone. It's the one person who gets your texts. It's the idea that if you can just make it back to your room, you can breathe again. On Saturday, April 25th, 2009, Brittanee left her hotel that evening to visit someone staying at another resort nearby. This is one of those details that sounds harmless on paper. She walked a short distance to another hotel. But the setting matters. It's nighttime in a busy vacation town. She's far from home. She's a teenage girl walking alone. She arrives at the other resort, and security cameras capture her there. Later, cameras capture her leaving. And after that, the story turns into a blank space filled in by questions. What happened between that last camera frame and the moment her phone went quiet? Did someone approach her? Did she accept a ride? Did she think she was making a safe choice in a place that only felt safe because it was crowded? Here's what we do know. Brittanee was texting her boyfriend that night, and then the messages stopped. No more replies. No more be right back. No more I'm okay. Her boyfriend starts calling. At first, it's probably irritation mixed with worry. The normal panic of a text thread suddenly ending when you know someone is out. He calls her friends. He tries to find out if she's with them, if she made it back, if her phone died. And then, the call that changes everything. He contacts Brittanee's mother. And that's when Brittanee's mom learns the truth. Her daughter isn't at a friend's house nearby. She's in Myrtle Beach. There's a specific kind of fear that hits when you realize you're behind the timeline. Like the world started moving without you, and now you're sprinting to catch up. Brittanee's mother calls authorities. She calls family. She calls anyone who might be able to bridge the distance between New York and South Carolina. Because parents will tell you, it doesn't matter how old your kid is. When they vanish, they're suddenly small again. And you'd trade anything to rewind the clock to the last moment you could have stopped them from walking out that door. The next morning, police begin searching. They find her hotel room, and the details inside raise more questions. Clothes she packed are still there, but her purse and cell phone are not. That matters, because it suggests she didn't just wander off to cool down and come back later. Those are the things you keep if you plan to be out in the world. Investigators pull surveillance footage. They track down the people she had been with. They try to map her movements along the strip. And then there's the cell phone. In 2009, cell phone tracking wasn't what people imagine today, with perfect GPS dots on a map. But phone records could still tell a story, where a phone connected, what general area it moved through. Those records suggested her phone traveled south of Myrtle Beach. And suddenly the search gets bigger. Brittanee's family comes down to South Carolina, and the case becomes a public plea. Posters, news coverage, faces on TV screens, a teenage smile frozen in time, while everyone else ages year by year. For days, then weeks, Myrtle Beach becomes a place with two realities. Spring break crowds still coming and going, and a family searching the same streets, looking into the faces of strangers, wondering which one of them knows something. But as the days stretch, the leads don't come in clean. Instead, they come in messy. Rumors, tips, sightings. And when you're desperate, every rumor feels like a lifeline. The problem is that rumors can also be a trap. Over the years, Brittanee's disappearance became one of those cases that people talked about with certainty they didn't earn. Theories multiplied. One of the most persistent fears was human trafficking, because the setting seemed to fit what people imagine. Young woman, tourist town, lots of strangers, a quick disappearance. And it's important to say this carefully. Trafficking is real, and young people can be vulnerable while traveling. But in Brittanee's case, that fear also created noise that made it harder to see what was actually happening. At one point, a sensational story spread so widely that it practically became folklore. That Brittanee had been taken somewhere else, that she'd been harmed, that her body had been disposed of in a way that sounded like something out of a nightmare. It was the kind of story that makes people stop thinking and start reacting. It made headlines. It created villains. It made strangers feel like they knew the ending. But there was a problem. It wasn't proven. And when unproven stories take over a case, they don't just mislead the public. They can shape pressure, priorities, and the emotional reality of a family trapped in limbo. Imagine living with not knowing, and then being forced to hear strangers repeat their favorite version of your child's last moments like it's entertainment. Meanwhile, the investigation continued, sometimes quietly, sometimes with bursts of activity. Years went by, and the question that hung over everything was simple. How does a teenager disappear from a busy area without a clear trail? Part of the answer is uncomfortable, because it points to something that happens more often than we want to admit. You can be visible and still be unprotected. A crowded street doesn't guarantee safety. It just guarantees witnesses who don't realize they're witnessing something. If someone approaches you with confidence, like they belong there, like they have a normal reason to speak to you, your brain wants to categorize it as harmless. Especially if you're young. Especially if you're trying to keep the peace, not cause a scene, not be dramatic. And especially if you already feel alone. There's another layer here that matters. When you travel with friends at that age, you assume you're traveling as a unit. But friend groups can fracture. People pair off. Someone gets left behind. Someone goes back to the room early. Someone else goes out again. And the moment you're separated, your safety drops. Not because you did something wrong. Because predators look for moments like that. The years after Brittanee vanished were filled with investigative turns. Some promising, some misleading, some heartbreaking. Authorities revisited evidence. They tracked tips. They tried to make sense of the cell phone data. They looked at people Brittanee had met. And then in 2016, the FBI publicly stated they believed Brittanee had been killed and announced a reward for information. That announcement hit like a door slamming shut. Because for years, hope and grief had been living in the same room. Families of missing people learned to survive in a state of suspended reality. You can't fully mourn because you don't know. You can't fully hope because you're terrified of what hope might cost you. When federal investigators say they believe your child is gone, it doesn't give closure. It gives a new kind of pain. Still, the case didn't stop. It didn't disappear into a file cabinet forever. Investigations don't always move forward like a straight line. Sometimes they move like a tide, rushing in, pulling back, reshaping the shore slowly until one day the landscape looks different. And in Brittanee's case, the landscape changed years later because of something both ordinary and powerful. They looked again. Investigators re-examined cell phone data and surveillance footage with fresh eyes and better tools. And this is where the story tightens. Because a phone doesn't just communicate. It moves. And movement can be measured. At one point that night, Brittanee's phone activity suggested something that would become central to the case. The phone appeared to move at a walking pace, and then at a much faster pace, consistent with being in a vehicle. That shift matters, because it helps define a moment when walking alone becomes, now she's in a car. And once you define the moment, you can go hunting in the footage. Here's the thing about surveillance video. It's both everything and nothing. It can show you the truth and still hide the truth in plain sight, because the crucial detail might be in the corner, in the background, in one car passing at the wrong time. Investigators matched the timeline, the last known walking activity, the first faster movement, and what the cameras captured on the road. And according to public reporting on the case, when they narrowed it down to that window, only one vehicle appeared passing through at that time. One. That's the kind of detail that turns a mystery into a target. From there, investigators linked that vehicle to a man named Raymond Moody. By then, he had been on law enforcement's radar in connection with the case for years, but not in a way that had produced enough to charge him. Now the pressure narrowed. In early May 2022, the case finally broke open. Raymond Moody confessed, according to authorities, and led investigators to Brittanee's remains. After 13 years of searching, Brittanee was found in Georgetown County, South Carolina. And if you've ever followed a long-term missing person case, you know how complicated that moment is. It's finally, and it's also too late. It's answers, and it's also confirmation of your worst fear. It's a path forward, and it's also the end of every alternate reality you allowed yourself to imagine just to survive. Moody was charged, and later that year, he pleaded guilty. He was sentenced to life in prison, along with additional sentences for kidnapping and sexual assault. But the story didn't fully end there, because investigations like this are rarely just one person, one night, one decision. As more information became public, attention turned to the question of whether anyone else knew, helped, or lied to protect the truth. And that's where Angel Cooper Voss comes into the story, Moody's longtime girlfriend. Federal prosecutors said Voss lied to investigators for years about her role, and in 2025, she was sentenced to 18 years in federal prison for lying to the FBI during the investigation. According to the U.S. Department of Justice press release, prosecutors said she assisted in luring Brittanee into the vehicle by offering a ride back to her hotel, and that she took Brittanee's phone, described as her only chance of survival, while leaving her alone with Moody. It's difficult to read that and not feel your stomach drop, because it points to something terrifyingly simple. How quickly a bad situation becomes irreversible when someone loses the one tool that connects them to help. In the federal system, there's no parole. 18 years is real time. And if you're Brittanee's family, it's also a different kind of answer. Not just what happened, but how the truth was delayed. Now zoom out, because Brittanee's case is specific, but the vulnerability it reveals is not. When young people travel, especially teens or early 20s, there are a few conditions that predators exploit over and over. Distance. When you're far from home, you're far from the adults who know your patterns. Far from neighbors who would notice. Far from your normal routes and safe places. Disruption. Travel changes routines. People are in unfamiliar areas. They're distracted. They're focused on fun, not risk. Fragmentation. Friend groups split. People drift. Someone stays behind. Someone walks alone just this once. And privacy. Teens keep secrets. They don't always share plans with parents. They don't always want to check in. They don't want to get in trouble. But secrecy creates isolation, and isolation is where danger grows. And if there's one line worth repeating here, it's this. The responsibility always belongs to the predator. But safety planning belongs to all of us. That means parents and teens having hard conversations before trips, without shame, without blame, and without the kind of punishment that teaches kids to hide more. It means choosing a call me, no matter what rule. It means agreeing on check-ins that aren't about control, they're about time. About shortening the window between something's weird and we need help. It means practical habits. Staying in groups, using rides you can verify, keeping your phone charged, sharing location with someone you trust, and trusting your instincts even if it feels awkward. Because awkward is survivable. Silence is not. Brittanee Drexel's case also shows something else. The way misinformation can attach itself to tragedy and become its own kind of harm. Theories filled the gaps for years. Some from tips, some from jailhouse stories, some from people who meant well, and some from people who just wanted to be part of the drama. But the truth, as it often is, turned out to be both simpler and darker than the internet's favorite version. A teenager walked alone. A predator took advantage. And for years, a family lived inside a question mark. When you hear Brittanee's story, it's tempting to focus on the secret trip, on the argument, on the choice to go anyway. But that's not the heart of it. The heart of it is that Brittanee was a kid who wanted a week of freedom. A kid who thought the world would keep its usual rules around her. And someone proved her wrong. If there's one thing Brittanee's mother is often credited for, it's persistence, refusing to let her daughter's name fade, continuing to push, continuing to ask, continuing to demand the kind of attention that forces agencies to revisit, recheck, and rework what they thought they knew. Because sometimes cases get solved not by one dramatic new tip, but by a person who simply refuses to stop knocking. 13 years later, investigators finally had what they needed to close the central question of the case. But closure doesn't mean peace. It means you can finally name the shape of what you lost. And you can finally stop living in 10 different imagined endings at once. Brittanee Drexel went to Myrtle Beach for spring break, expecting a memory. Instead, she became a warning written in real life, one that families across the country still feel in their bones every time a teenager asks to travel somewhere far away. If you're a parent listening to this, the lesson isn't never let them go. It's build a plan that doesn't rely on everything going right. If you're a young person listening to this, the lesson isn't be afraid of the world. It's don't confuse crowds with safety, and don't confuse a short walk with a harmless one. And if you take nothing else from Brittanee's story, take this. One decision doesn't define a life, but one moment of vulnerability can change everything. Brittanee deserved to come home, and she deserves to be remembered as more than the way she was taken. If you want to honor her, do it by protecting the people in your life who still have the chance to walk back through that hotel door. Check in. Stay together. Keep the phone. Make the call. And when something feels off, loudly, unapologetically, and immediately get help.